Hi, I'm Dan from the Dramm Corporation, part of the commercial sprayers. Today we will be showing you on how to take apart a Hydra pump and put it back together the correct way. First thing we will do is grab a 6mm Allen wrench and take off the 6 bolts here that hold the manifold to the pump. Now the cylinder pipes you can just pull off by hand. Then the next step would be to take your inlet valve assemblies off. You got the 3 number 10mm nuts on. And once you have those off, you can just pull the manifold off. Set that aside. Now the next step would be, you're going to pull the 3 bolts off. Once again, it's 10mm. Before you take the cover off, you always want to have a drain pan underneath, because if there's any excess oil inside here, it will drain out down to the pan. Move this plate around with the punch, and you can just tap it until one of the holes line up with the corner here, because then you can go behind and catch it with the punch, and you just lightly tap on that plate, and then you can turn it once it frees up and just work back and forth. And I just normally do it on the top 2. And they'll just pop off, and then you see the inside where the bearing and the crank is. Okay, and then after you got the front off, you're just going to take this eyeglass out. I got this special tool that goes in there, but you can just use a vice grips or a channel locks just gently on there to turn that. Just break it loose, turn it out. Then the next step is you have to hit on the back of this crank. I got a big bolt. If you have a heavier punch, you can also use that. And you just pound that crankshaft out of the pump. Once it falls out of that bearing, you know you have it out. And then once you got that crank pounded all that back bearing, I'll just take a piece of paper towel, and you just gotta keep turning on it and lightly pulling until you get the crank worked out. If you have a little magnet, would help. Just take your little magnet and you can just grab onto that pen, and it pulls out of each one, and you can just reach in there and grab out, and there's 3 of them in here. Next step is to pull these 3 out, and I always have an old nut that I'll screw on here. The other way you can do it is you could take one of your nuts that you had from your inlet valve assemblies and just put a little washer behind and put the nut on, and then you can vice grip to the washer instead of the nut. And I'll just get a heavy vice grips on. Take your hammer and just lightly pound and they pop right out, and as you can see, the oil seal sits right up in there. And you just repeat the next two. So once you get that out, you can see the oil seal that sits down in there. It's right here. And we got one more we have to do. And the key is when you're hitting on this, you want to try to hit straight because you can bend the rods pretty easy. When this is in there, the reason we're pulling them all the way out to get at the oil seal is because you do not want to take a screwdriver and try prying these oil seals out like this. That it's causing damage to the rod and to the housing. If you gash that housing up where that oil seal sits, it's never going to seal again. So that it's very important to pull it all the way out to get the oil seals changed. Now, once you get it all apart, now you can clean up the pump, the inside, and all your parts before you put it back together so you don't have any grime in there. All right, now we are going to clean all the parts up with the solvent. You can always use a toothbrush to get inside. Just scrub them. You can even reach down inside with a toothbrush. Clean inside the shaft where it connects onto the motor because that's usually pretty rusted up. And if you clean that nice, then it'll slide back on. And I will take a toothbrush inside, continue cleaning everything up nice. After you're done cleaning, you just want to make sure you dry it off before you start putting it back together. I just kind of take a piece of paper towel and dry it inside. You can dry down inside the best you can. And once you got it pretty well dry, then you want to start reassembling the pump. First thing you're going to do is put the rods back in. Just kind of set them down in there. Let them sit all the way down. And then the next thing is putting the new oil seals in. And it's very important that you put the flat side facing up. So you're just going to set them in there. And what I use to pound them in place is I got an 18mm deep well socket. I just kind of put over top and pound them down in. Once they're pounded in, they sit flush inside here. Then you just want to pull these up, and you're just going to want to get them caught up in there and work them up slowly so you don't pull that oil seal back out. Reaching in and pushing up, kind of wiggling these just to get them started through that oil seal. And from there, I'm going to put it back in my vise. All right, once I got it back in my vise, then I will grab and start putting everything back in. And you want to start from the back. Just kind of reach in there. Once you get it lined up, you can just get the pin started through there. the second one in. And then lastly, the third one, which is a little easier. Okay, once you get all three of those in, the next thing is getting the shaft back through. And here, like when we took it out, you had to wiggle it and turn it. Getting it back in is the same way. Once you get it through the first two, you can kind of get it lined up with the back. And then you can move these back and forth from what you can see inside to line everything up. Once you know you gotta start it through everything and into the bearing, you'll be able to spin on this by hand. And then that's all we all do is take your punch or shaft and lightly pound it back into the back bearing. And you'll know it's all the way back in, but the shaft will be sticking over that back of the bearing just a little bit. Or when you're pounding, you can hear that sound. When you're pounding, it'll be a different sound. Then you know you got it in far enough. Then you can put your eyeglass back in. And like I said, you can use vice grips or channel locks and just snug it just a little bit. And then on the front here, once you got that shaft all the way in, you can put your O-ring back on. I'll just set it in the pump side. Once you got your O-ring seated in there, you can put your cover back on. And here, I'll just tap around just lightly and you watch so that O-ring doesn't fall back out. Once that's hammered back in place, you can put your 3 bolts back in. Once again, that's with your 10mm socket. Okay, once those 3 are tight, and then you can put your seal retainers back in. And then your oil wicks. There's no certain way to put these in, but when you put them back in, you should oil them up. I'm just putting a little oil around the oil wicks. And you just push them up inside the retainer. The next step is we would be putting the manifold back on the pump, but before I do that, I'm going to show you how to replace the U-packings in the manifold. I'll just take a flathead screwdriver, just kind of catch it and flip them out without hitting the brass at all. As you can see on this new one, you can see there's a spring up inside. and on the other side it's flat. You want the flat side facing up when you're putting these in. And what I normally do, I'll just get them started and I'll just press them in by hand. You shouldn't need to hammer them in or anything. Normally they press in pretty easy just by hand. Alright, and once you see all three of them are in there the correct way. And now since we got those U-packings replaced, we can put the manifold back onto the pump by just sliding it back on. Once that's set, the next thing is we'll be putting the inlet valve assemblies back on. So on the first one here, you're going to have just a flat washer on. You're going to have the spacer put on, and then the actual inlet valve part here. You got the shiny side, the flat side. The flat side goes in towards the manifold. And then you're going to have the washer with the holes, the slotted holes in, and then the lock washer, and then a nut. And that would be the correct way to put one on. First put on your flat washer, then you got a spacer, then you got your actual valve with the shiny part towards the pump, your slotted washer, your lock washer, and then your lock nut. You can tighten those down. Put your cylinder pipes back on, and those you can just slide over and push back on over the O-ring. And the last step is you're going to put your manifold back on and then put your 6 bolts in. And you just have to tighten them down. And I normally will snug them all up and then start from the center, tightening them. This was the video for the complete rebuild of a Hydra pump, including how to change the oil seals, the U-packings, and the inlet valve assemblies.